The beauty of handheld games, or at least the past beauty, since they kind of no longer exist anymore, we have more to that later, was before not just novelty, but also the fact of getting not only handheld ports of major console games, but also getting unique experiences that would only work because it's on a handheld device. Let me explain. Of course, one of the go-to examples of a handheld franchise is Pokemon, that is still a handheld franchise to this day. No, I don't care if the Switch is a hybrid device, it's still for the form as a handheld device, and Pokemon's a handheld series, with the only outliers for more console experiences, at least the big ones people mention, being Pokemon Colosseum, Pokemon Colosseum XD God of Darkness, neither of which play like a traditional Pokemon game. So, yeah, Pokemon's been a handheld franchise to this day, and that's been the main focus of it, which, granted, I know people have issues with Pokemon nowadays, but it does highlight how some people view Pokemon as has to be a big premier console experience, which, with the price tag it has, yeah, I can say that argument, but also the fact that you could tell the exception was handheld franchise, handheld focus, doesn't matter if the Switch is a hybrid console, they're still focusing on the handheld experience. But with Pokemon, it highlighted how a more simpler RPG series could work for a handheld device, but also its social aspect with whole training and battling also made it to where people want to see what Pokemon you have, what they got, the multiple versions and everything. So the handheld aspect definitely helps with Pokemon, and why I believe Pokemon should actually remain more of a handheld franchise because of what it benefits from it greatly with how it operates. A popular example of a handheld game is Tetris. Can someone tell me why Tetris is like a go-to example of a handheld game? Because like, I look it up and it had an NES port, a Famicom port, Mega Drive port, arcade, several PC versions and everything. Why is Tetris coming associated with the Game Boy? But it's a more simpler puzzle game that still has newer and newer releases to this day entirely, trying to change the formula, but people associate it with the Game Boy. And it's more simpler form, but it is super enjoyable and addicting, and with its portable nature meant take it with you on the go and have the music haunt your souls and dreams, or bless them, forevermore. Well, seriously, why is Tetris associated with the Game Boy? Another thing that handhelds generally got, especially in the mid-2000s, were specifically ports of console games, whether it be stuff that honestly probably were not a good fit for the platform. Something like, hey, let's port Mega Man and Bass, which is a more difficult platformer, to a device that has a smaller screen, and stuff like that. Or especially RPG, the Final Fantasy franchise, getting either remakes, as Final Fantasy 1 and 2, the normal Souls versions, or enhanced remasters with freaking Final Fantasies 4, 5, and 6, getting the advanced versions that added more content specifically for 5 and 6. Or then later, Final Fantasy 4 on the DS got its own unique version with voice acting, 3D graphics, everything. And then got another remake on PSP where they added in these new endgame quests that not only add more to the characters' writing, but also give a whole new scenario for them, and basically you got more abilities and stuff for them. Final Fantasy 4 got everything back then, goddamn. A unique experience was the fact of companies to make their own versions of console games, like, hey, how do we take an open world Spider-Man 3 and translate it to a Game Boy Advance? The answer? Side-scrolling platformer. It's always a side-scrolling platformer. When isn't it? But it was its own unique experience for the game that, yeah, if you were a person who probably exclusively wanted to play like the big open world Spider-Man game, you should have known they were going to get that from Game Boy Advance. But it's also a thing where companies had to make their own unique spin on a game because of the hardware they're using. Or even crazier ideas like, hey, let's take Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance and then put on Game Boy Advance. And makes you go, someone greenlit that. But they did greenlit that, and it makes for an interesting example, something you wouldn't really expect, especially with the graphics trying to go for to replicate on the device as well. Which shows how developers try to get creative and try and sometimes be closer to the console version when trying to make a more handheld release. You also have some games where the console version is based on the handheld release, Like when it comes to stuff like Silent Hill Origins or Jak and Daxter Lost Frontier, where their main thing was on the PSP, but they made a PS2 version after the fact, to pretty much at the same time, but the main version was the PSP version, while the console version may seem not as good as a result, or maybe the fact that people may have a lower standard for the game if it's played on its native platform, being a PSP, as opposed to being on the PS2, where it now has to retroactively try and make a more smaller experience now fit a console quality. But while there are many ports for handheld devices, those are the ones we'll generally remember the consoles for. It's the original titles that took advantage of what the console had to offer. I will forever keep mentioning the Boktai franchise and how the solar sensor would never work on a console because you had to be able to go outside, and the Switch's design is no way, shape, or form can it compensate a solar sensor such as that. One of those things that with a Switch being a quote-unquote hybrid portable console and everything, it honestly wouldn't be able to do that. Or something like the Handheld DS, where many games can't replicate the dual screen whole entire style, so many games have to try and accommodate. The main feature of the DS is now seen as a barrier by companies. The Legend of Zelda has had many entries across many different consoles and platforms, but you'll see people who will bet and enjoy sort of more handheld experiences, like Link's Adventure on the Game Boy, then Game Boy Color, and then remade on the Switch, was generally a really beloved Zelda title. So it's one of those things where, hey, that's a handheld title, and then got re-released on Game Boy Color to take advantage of the power of color to make a unique dungeon, and that's the thing that people generally love about the game. Or being able to make something like the Oracle games, where by the end point, you have to combine codes from both games in order to unlock the actual finale. So either you get both copies, or you can have someone else get another copy, and I get the code from them that advertises more social ability, social interaction, despite it being a single-player game and everything. And there's just unique stuff like that. Or the Minish Cap of Game Boy Advance that many people also love as well. Or freaking Four Swords, which started out as a bonus mode when you played A Link to the Past on Game Boy Advance and everything, and then got its own console release down the road that required the Game Boy Advance in order to play. Like, a whole bunch of stuff with the handheld platform that just got done, and nowadays, I mean, I'm pretty sure Minish Cap is on Nintendo Switch Online, but as for rest examples, you can get Link to the Past, but it won't be the GBA version, which some would say is a plus because they added in Link making a freaking... They poured in young Link's freaking attack grunt from Ocarina of Time every single time you attack the GBA version. It's like, why would you do that? You're attacking way more often in the GBA version compared to Ocarina of Time. You also have even titles from major companies like Sonic the Hedgehog, where there's been no port of Sonic Rush titles, no Rush, no Rush Adventure, no Sonic Colors on the DS, which effectively was a Rush title and how it played, which made a more unique experience from the Wii version to where many enjoy the DS version more than the Wii version, even having its own exclusive final boss segment that's just not in the Wii version. Also had different wisp abilities, had this one little voice effect that I wish the final boss of Sonic Colors on Wii had, stuff like that made it a unique version that people who played it don't like it more than the Wii version of the game. But those games just never got ported because, like I said, companies feel like the dual screen dynamic of the DS is now a barrier to overcome, so they just don't want to bother taking the time and resources to figure out how to do it or anything. Even nowadays, people treat the entire main gimmick of the Nintendo DS as something that is now bad because it makes it impossible to play on a more standard control format when it was never designed to be played on a standard control format. That's why it's more unique and different. Mega Man completely thrived on handheld, with classic Mega Man getting its own unique versions on the Game Boy, the Game Boy Color game Mega Man X3 1 and 2, which were kind of half ports, kind of half unique style for those Mega Man X games, or also Mega Man Battle Network that just flourished on GBA, becoming the most popular branch of Mega Man and everything. So I get different versions, so it's Mega Man Battle Network 3, trying to follow more Pokemon format and everything, and just flourished like crazy. Mega Man Battle Network 5 then got a re-release on DS called Double Team DS that tried to combine the content of both games as well. And then a freaking Star Force after that on the DS as well. This doesn't even count the fact that Mega Man Zero, the canonical sequel to the X games, were also all on the Game Boy Advance as well. Or then Mega Man ZX and ZX Advent on the DS. Mega Man flourished so much. Granted, some of those games didn't sell, while the Star Force games weren't the biggest financial hit, or also how ZX Advent also wasn't a big financial hit, but just look at how many unique experiences for Mega Man there are just for handheld everything. Meanwhile, the console versions still continue with Mega Man X or Classic Mega Man, but like, there's way more on the handheld front when it comes to Mega Man than there is on the console front. I've said it before many times, and I'll keep doing it. The World Ends With You had an entire gameplay system that only worked on DS because of the dual screen mechanic. And every port afterward had to pretty much tone down what it was doing and simplify it for the sake of a more, not conventional, because they still had a more unique gameplay style, but try and make it more playable without the dual screen dynamic with, oh, here's the little remix on iOS, or oh, here's now Final Remix on Switch, both of which, those versions can't really capitalize on what made the World With You's gameplay so unique because there's no dual screen dynamic and everything. And then the other ones with you, the canonical sequel, then just changed the gameplay entirely because it can't try and do what the first game did. So instead, it took the benefit of trying to be its own thing. We also had still the Kirby franchise, which for the most part was a handheld franchise, everything, with a lot of the games later down the road, especially nowadays, getting ported to consoles. Although I guess you want to get technical on the Switch Hyper Console, but that's the point kind of thing. But it was mostly in handheld franchise. Many entries were also on home console, but a lot of them, especially when the DS was freaking new or was a thing, so many were on DS. Some of them were ports of older games that were enhanced, but so many of them were just brand new titles for the platform. Or sometimes it could be like Kirby's Epic Yarn, which was made for the Wii, but then down the road got an enhanced port on the 3DS. Of all things, like, just shows like even with that, like, now let's take this, make it even better, but for this console instead. Or even just confusing ports of games, like Donkey Kong Country getting a port on freaking Donkey Country Returns, getting a port on the 3DS. Xenoblade Chronicles on the Wii, getting a port on the new 3DS. Don't worry, everyone's so confused by that one. Don't worry, you're not alone on that one. But it's a whole entire thing where some games just got ports specifically for a handheld system, even if it didn't really make much sense why they did that, but I'm not the people who judges the money. You also have stuff like Yoshi's Topsy Turvy, that also something that would really only work on a handheld device, or even one of the WarioWare games that requires you to share the device. Granted, there are people who managed to play that game using the GameCube accessory allows you to play Game Boy Advance games on it, so it's not impossible, but it's also one of those things that, yeah, there were accessories that made it so some portable games could be played on the big screen. Like I mentioned, the GameCube had one, Super Nintendo also had one as well. So there is stuff like that, or there was the Sega Nomad, which was, the whole thing was to be a hybrid console, with just the fact of the format they went with it just didn't really mesh well, so people didn't really like it. So despite the Switch being a big hit thing, Sega did try something similar. It just needed better execution, despite the winning formula they had with the idea. Now, I mentioned before how I felt like handheld games basically don't really exist anymore. It's because of the whole entire thing when it comes to the Nintendo Switch. Because it has to be both a console and a portable device, it pretty much shifts how the games can come out. I mentioned how some games like Bokta, Yoshi's Topsy Turvy, etc. probably would not work on a Nintendo Switch at all. But you also have the fact of many games nowadays on the Switch get judged next to the more console experiences that are on the platform. I mentioned Pokemon. Pokemon, first and foremost, is a handheld franchise, but it now has to be judged next to all these big franchises, which some feel the comparison is unfair until you see a price tag where it's pricing itself at the same price as those games. So is it really truly unfair in that case? If they're trying to have like this big console price, even though Pokemon from the get-go has been trying to be more, has been a portable experience? Who knows? Hell, even brand new games, like I mentioned it, Metroid Dread got bashed for its visuals for not looking like a big premier console title. You know, Metroid Dread is freaking awesome, but people, when they saw it as a console game, judged it more as solely a console game and not the console handheld hybrid, considering the previous game, Metroid Samus Returns, was on the 3DS, which was the remake, or the fact that up to that point, a lot of the more 2D Metroid games were being made for handheld devices and not home consoles. Once again, people wanted to judge it because it's on the same platform as all these major titles and everything. Some could argue that a game that's smaller in scope would quote-unquote mean it's a handheld game, but is it necessarily a handheld game, or is a game just being made for the Switch and all that? Which is why I feel like handheld gaming, at least in the form it existed back in the day, when it was dedicated handheld platforms, is buried and gone and has been ever since the Switch came out. You know, it's the fact of, oh, the Switch isn't a replacement for the 3DS. Okay, there's not been another freaking handheld like the 3DS at all since the Switch came out, so kind of don't really see the care about it. Even rumors of, oh, Sony and Microsoft considering a handheld device. And it's just, oh, it's going to be a device that's like the Switch, where it's just like, oh, it plays console games, but on the go and all that. And that's the thing. Console games on the go. So many things are not being made typically for a handheld device. It's just a console game that you can now take with you, and many love that, and that's fantastic for them. I just feel like when it comes to experiences made for the portable device or trying to take advantage of unique portable gimmick, is just pretty much buried and gone. It's where saw people upset that Persona 3 Portable got ported instead of Persona 3 FES. Even though Portable's the one with the film protagonist, so of course they picked that one. But then people were mad that why bring the portable one as the lesser graphics and visual novel cutscenes, than the one with the cutscenes of characters standing around awkwardly and everything. So it's one of those things where people wanted the one that had a higher presentation, and also included the canonical epilogue. But for a lot of people, that's not the point. So they wanted a more better looking one than the one that had this whole unique route and everything. The Kingdom Hearts franchise also had many unique experiences because of the handheld format, the chain of memories, and its card system. Yeah, then they kind of sort of remade on PS2. It was a low effort project, but when they did that, hey look, now it's the one people go to because they think it's quote-unquote the superior experience because it looks better, has more voice acting and everything, even though when it comes to the gameplay, it pretty much doesn't translate properly to a big 3D environment, and some of the limitations from the handheld are now just bleh on an actual console and everything. Oh, look at also Birth by Sleep. Once again, you can see some of the things from its roots being a handheld game. It also removed some of the multiplayer stuff that it had back when it was on the PSP and everything, and just people just see that as the norm and everything. Or also when they just didn't remake Street Fighter over 2 days and recoded, instead just offering to just make cutscenes for them and that's it. It's like, what about the gameplay, unique experiences those games brought? And for some people, they don't even care, even though they did some real cool things, and there have been people who did go out of their way to emulate those games and have fun with the cool experiences. Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, also on 3DS, that Yeah, I got nothing. Dream Drop Distance freaking mechanics for the 3DS were kind of ass. For mechanics, I mean, it's the one that's typically required using the touchscreen for stuff, because listen, the Dream Musketeers World's boss at the end and requires you to essentially do quick time events, but with a touchscreen was awful, and I will not accept any other response. Also the fact that when it comes to handheld games, a lot of games were designed with quote-unquote more bite-sized play. Like, oh, Crisis Core has a whole mission system, which are small missions that you can do in a short amount of time, and stuff like that. Which is also now being incorporated for the Switch. Like, people praise, oh, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Mario Odyssey, you can play this game with the moons. It's like bite-sized little missions, you always make you time about progress. Except, once again, you're also a console, and doing that on a console would be way more annoying, and one of the people generally dislike about those games. People love those games, but when it comes to, oh, here's the shrines, or oh, here's every power moon, great. There is just like so many different power moves that all have the same value because they all require the exact same basic task because, oh, they're all everywhere, most ridiculous of places. It just becomes, eh. And Mario Odyssey at the end of the game lets you just buy power moons, highlighting how worthless they are. Like, I have a clip where I bought like over 100 power moons and used them all in one go on the freaking Odyssey ship, everything. And it's like one of those things that I could just do that because I can just use the power of money to just buy the power moons. I get the money using the Luigi's Balloon World thing. But it's like, I can just do that. It's like, some would say that's great. I would say, kind of just makes every power moon kind of bleh, but people praise it because, oh, it's a handheld idea if you can play it for a bit on the go. Great. Once again, you're also a console device, while using some of the handheld tricks doesn't really mesh well when you're also trying to advertise it as a console, or why somebody irks at him with the Switch's premise. Despite the fact that the premise should be a slam dunk. And then you have the thing that I constantly saw people saying for years, before the Persona games were on Switch, was constantly screaming how RPGs belong on a handheld device and RPGs were meant for handheld play. One, they were meant for social settings because tabletop RPGs are social stuff. So, what are you talking about? And meant for handheld devices. You made that one up and you know it. But yes, handheld devices do get RPGs, but so does everything else, especially console devices get RPGs. And I get it, it's just people wanting to have more RPGs on a handheld device, but don't try to lie about it or make up some crap about how RPGs were designed for handheld experience when they blatantly were not. Like, some RPGs were designed for more handheld experience and were made for that console, like the Mario Luigi RPG series, were generally handheld series until about Brothership, which, once again, still on a handheld device at the end of the day. But it's one of those things that people constantly mention how RPGs are made for this platform. It's like, it's not. In fact, it was made for a social setting because Dungeons & Dragons exists. But you get the idea. Just want more RPGs on their platform, but don't try and make hard up, especially when it's other RPGs you blatantly don't even play on the Switch to begin with. It just came to mind how I'm trying to talk about my gripe with the Switch is the fact that a lot of stuff it does is clearly being made for a handheld mindset, but it completely forgoes the console aspect of it, the home console TV aspect of it. But everyone's like the PlayStation Vita, a handheld device that for its early years was just seen as a portable PlayStation 3 and just had these console games being ported over that lost features because, well, it has to be put to a portable device that's more of a console experience, but was seen as, hey, you can play this game on the go, with some games like Metal Gear Solid, Peace Walker, and Peace Walker HD, trying to do a whole entire transfer your save file in and out kind of thing, but it doesn't really fully work, especially when You gotta buy the PSP version of Peace Walker separately, so it doesn't come with the Vita collection, since it was a PSP game to begin with, which means separate servers also for online modes. So it's one of those things where that's one of the gripes with Vita early on, the fact that it didn't really have any real handheld experiences going on for it when it first came out until a while, but by that point, so I started giving up on it. Speaking of PlayStation Vita, it was a good idea and good hardware, but everything around it just freaking screwed it over. Like I mentioned, early life was just ports of games going to get on PS3, or when they did make games, they made them hybrid ports of, it's Vita and PS3, where you could use the Vita as an accessory, but again, that's a whole console you're treating as a bonus accessory rather than the respect it deserves as its own portable device and everything. And on top of the fact of the memory card was overly expensive, everything. Apparently, I thought it was just my memory card that corrupted, but apparently it was a common, not common, it's not very common, but like common enough issue where the memory cards just be corrupted on top of them being expensive. And then by the end, most people played on it were indie games, which good for the indie devs, but like indie dev support isn't enough to kind of save the console, especially when the person who made the console, Sony, gave the F up on the thing. And the Vita itself wasn't a bad idea. Like everyone mentioned, like it should have been called Vita, it should have been called the PSP 2, because like even my favorite system is the PSP. And then I told him that he got a successor to Vita, and he never knew about it at all, and he would have actually loved the Vita because he loves the PSP, but everything went against the Vita, even though the fact of it was good hardware. The only people left are the ones who love the console, but they love the console too much to the point where, time for my good old saying, a Steam Deck fan is just a Switch fan who's just a Vita fan, and Vita fans are a bit up their own ass because they own a Vita. Something that just hit me is the fact that handheld devices, at least the ones with the major companies, tend to be some of the best when it comes to backwards compatibility. Like, the Game Boy Color played Game Boy games, the Game Boy Advance could play Game Boy Color Game Boy games, the DS could play Game Boy Advance games and use that for some DS games, the 3DS could play DS games, although the 3DS was region locked, so you had to get the game typically from your region, couldn't even do regular DS games, so that sucked, but it was still backwards compatible as a result. The PS Vita could play PSP games, granted only digital versions of the PSP games, and it couldn't play all of them due to licensing, and a PlayStation TV could play even less of them, but so it's one of him. And also we got the Switch 2, which can play most Switch 1 games, so interesting enough, the handheld devices tend to be some of the best because of backwards compatibility, and some consoles may have backwards compatibility that may not function well, or maybe slept in the last second. So, interesting to know that handheld games tend to be the chief when it comes to the whole entire dynamic of trying to get backwards compatible games. I've seen many like to believe that, those kind of handheld games back in the day would still be released even if it had a device like the Switch. To which I say, no. Like, I cannot imagine something like Dragon Ball Z, Legacy of Goku 1, 2, and Boo's Fury being greenlit today, especially since how long it took to even get Dragon Ball Z Kakarot to begin with, because in those years, they just had, we're gonna make here's another fighting game release. Meanwhile, the RPG games, while there were some on the Super Nintendo, or typically Super Famicom in Japan, then it was like, okay, now there are handhelds. Here's one on Game Boy Color. Here's one on the DS. Here's also Dragon Ball Advanced Adventure on the Game Boy Advance. Here's Dragon Ball Origins 1 and 2 and all that. All these more single-player focused stuff were instead saved for more handheld devices than the actual console releases that were just capitalizing on, well, it's a combat series, so let's make multiplayer fighting games instead. Plus, there's the fact that nowadays, developers wouldn't really get the green light to make such small-scale projects. Like, even back in the day, when Webfoot showed interest and wanted to make Legacy Goku 4, people's immediate thought was to put the game on the 3DS. No one thought, make it into a more grander console release, because they didn't think that kind of thing would really, one, probably benefit the game at all, but two, they didn't really think a much higher scale project like that would work. And nowadays, since companies want to spend all the money because they want the game to be as big of a hit as possible, they wouldn't exactly greenlight the idea of, oh, let's just freaking have this way smaller scale project, when companies nowadays just spend so much money because they want to get the most people, get the most attention, so make things bigger, grander, at the same time make it samey and not too experimental so you don't alienate people and all that. So such smaller scale projects that were only on handheld, I can't really imagine that kind of thing. Like even The One Ends With You, once it got the sequel, Near the Ones With You, changed the style up to have a more 3D environment. It was still smaller scale project, like AA in scale, but hey, look at now we have these 3D environments that they look nice, not the most detailed stuff, but I like the way Near the Ones With You looks. But it's one of those things where it's like, hey, look at the way it looks, and the thing, and we skewed away from the more pixel art style of the first game and everything to go for this more 3D style and kind of thing, where it's like, probably wouldn't have got the game greenlit if they kept the more pixel art style and all that. It was something like Kingdom Hearts, Chain of Memories, it got remade for PS2. It's all 3D environments and everything using the assets of Kingdom Hearts 1, since it was essentially just a bonus game Japan got when they got like a special re-release of Kingdom Hearts 2. But now it's like, oh, would you greenlit Kingdom Hearts get us more pixel art style? And the answer is, nah. I mean, you're like Pokemon. There are many Pokemon fans who wish Pokemon went back to a more pixel art style instead, but the company's going to keep moving forward with the more 3D style they've been doing since Pokemon X and Y, and I can exactly go back and can't exactly imagine a Pokemon company would greenlight them deciding to go back to more pixel art style for next entry and everything. Another spin-off series that I feel like will never come out, at least in the way people wanted it to, is the Dissidia franchise, which is essentially a Final Fantasy fighting game franchise that originally debuted on the PSP. With the fact that at the time of recording, they announced the most recent entry for mobile again, with this being a team of 3 fighting enemies, which is not only not what Dissidia is, it's just not what people really expected at all from the Dissidia title, especially since they just wanted a new console title. But the thing is, Dissidia started with the PSP with the first 2 entries people like, being Dissidia and Dissidia Duodecim. It did also get a console title that was actually a part of the arcade game, which did do very well in Japanese arcades, for instance Dissidia NT, but on consoles, it left a lot to be desired, and then had Dissidia Opera Omnia, also on mobile, not specifically a turn-based RPG. So I feel like, because we don't have dedicated handheld, I don't feel like Square Enix wants to go all in on the expenses of making a full-on Dissidia fighting game for consoles, so instead they look for more cheaper alternatives, like, oh, Dissidia on PSP was a lower budget spin-off title, and it got Duodecim, it can reuse most of the assets as well. Then they made Dissidia NT, which is just a port of the arcade game, so not to spend a whole lot because the arcade game essentially already paid for itself. So what they got left? Mobile titles that don't even resemble Dissidia anymore, but hey, it's a cheaper way of doing it, even if it's not what people really want or expected, but it's kind of the price you pay when making these things are so expensive and they don't really have like a handheld market that can be a cheaper alternative, because if we're trying to make a cheaper title, let's say for Switch, people will want the game to be console quality, since the Switch is also a console. Like I said, Switch has killed handheld gaming. Time for his last point that I honestly should have brought up first, is the size of portable devices, because yeah, the portable devices, they should be able to conveniently be taken around if the idea is the convenience of playing them. And from the ones I grew up with, because I'm not old enough for stuff that's like a Nomad or a Commodore 16 portable device, I can feel my youth returning saying that, but stuff like Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance were small, especially Game Boy Advance SP, that was very convenient for being able to pull it to your pocket and carry around everything. But nowadays, with the Switch and the Switch 2, especially the Switch 2, they're just so big and they just don't really fit the convenience of portability or the Steam Deck. Like, oh, you need a whole entire separate carrying case just for them. But yeah, but carrying a carrying case for them kind of shows how they're not really all that portable, because they're now bigger and bulkier and I'll take up more space and everything. Like, yeah, carrying case is still smaller than, let's say, the whatever the F a PS5 is. It's still like, yeah, like, if I want to make it bigger and bigger and everything, just highlights the fact that it's not getting that much portable. It's again, I feel like handheld gaming has essentially died in some way, shape, or form once the Switch happened, especially when people want the Switch to be bigger, especially when the people got the OLED version of Switch 1. Good for those people who enjoyed it, people who did want it for Switch 2, but it also highlights how the OLED screen, like, oh, people highlighting the Switch as portable device, portable only version. It's not a console only version, it's a portable only version with the Switch Lite and then the Switch OLED, which is designed for portability, because you hook it up to your TV, you're not exactly looking at the OLED screen anymore, now are you? It's just kind of one of the whole entire things that I feel like handheld gaming has essentially died once the Switch happened, everything. And I remember people thinking handheld gaming was gonna die once the freaking, oh, iOS and Android smartphones started happening. But no, those got their own unique experiences that have now been more and more the more popular ones being the gacha games that are mobile games at heart, but the fact that they're more advertising, oh, look at this console version, look at this PC release and everything, which is good for them, more market, more everything, but it highlights the fact that starts to feel like they're not fully being made for the mobile platform that they're mainly being developed on. You know, just don't want to ramble, but yeah, especially the size thing is starting to really irk me. I just want to ramble my handheld devices because the way they would use the devices to their advantage, create the cool, unique experiences that you couldn't get on a console, or just make their own unique versions of a game when they have to make multiple versions of something, is just freaking cool. But nowadays, you don't get that anymore, because the closest you got to a main portable device is the Switch, which is either just taking a handheld game and making it portable, which clearly many love. Many love that fact, hence why the Switch and Switch 2 are massive successes. Or you got the idea of just adding essentially a handheld game to what is a console handheld hybrid, so it's becoming like, oh, here's your bite-sized content everywhere that's probably going to annoy you if you don't use the device on handheld mode, because you want to play it, you want a console experience. Like, it's basically not the best. It's basically good in both worlds, but the best of both worlds with the designs they try to go for with the Switch, because it can't fully do both. Even it's a freaking jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. And some cool stuff like, oh, we're porting DS Castlevania games. Oh, but we gotta change them because we can't actually make them function properly portably. Oh, we got the ones with you for the remix, but we gotta use the iOS version because we can't make it function properly as it done on DS. And it's like, will we get a Sonic Rush re-release? Will we get Sonic Colors re-release, kind of stuff like that? Who knows? Boktai probably won't ever happen because Konami won't want to get rid of Solar Sensor aspect. But like, sadly, there's like no other way to port the games because of that. You'll think, oh, just don't bother porting them. But it's like, this is a problem. A lot of handheld games will just be on emulation because of that fact and aspect, because you can't recreate the experience, or because you need specific hardware. Just, man, it just feels like handheld games are dead. Anyway, that's all I gotta say about it. Alright, then go out there, play a game, whether portably or not. I know many people do hack like their Vita and 3DSs to have the full library of handheld games and the experience on them. Hell, there's people who use the 3DS to get the best experience in a goddamn Virtual Boy, and they don't have to pay $100 just for that. For the freaking, oh, why are they adding Virtual Boy games that require a device? Nintendo, what the hell is wrong with you? That's all I gotta say. Alright then, good day.